It is past time we put America and Americans first. Joe Biden and his regime are shelling out benefits to illegal immigrants like Oprah Winfrey on her show. Everyone gets a vote. Everyone gets recognized, even if you're here illegally. In New York, aliens are receiving $53 million in free prepaid debit cards. In Denver, Colorado, aliens get 6 free months of housing. And now they want to hand them seats in Congress to buy their lifelong allegiance to the Democrat Party. Americans deserve to have their voices fully represented, not diluted by illegal aliens. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you kindly, and it's always delightful to hear my friend from Colorado speak. One thing that I do want to point out, however, because there might be some students in the gallery today, is that there can be no illegal aliens and there can be no green card holders in Congress, because the Constitution very clearly specifies that you must have been a citizen for 7 years before you run for the House, and you must have been a citizen for 9 years before you run for the Senate, and you must be a born U.S. citizen in order to run for president of the United States, which some of the historians, as I think I mentioned before, attribute to Thomas Jefferson trying to write Alexander Hamilton out of the presidential sweepstakes. In any event, I think that my colleagues should probably relax with some of the hyperbole and exaggeration here. After all we're saying is let's keep doing what we've done since 1790 in the country. This is the way that the census and the reapportionment have always been run in the United States of America, and what they're proposing is obviously a radical departure from what the Constitution ordains.
That was, of course, MAGA Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert being absolutely schooled by one of our favorites, Congressman Jamie Raskin, him sarcastically saying it's always delightful to hear my friend from Colorado speak, and credit to TYT Investigates for putting together that split screen. I'll show you a little bit more in just a second, but I do want to give you the context for what's being debated and discussed there. Even before getting to that, it is funny how, without even being sort of broken down for you what it is that's being discussed, you can just tell the difference, the contrast between how informed Lauren Boebert is and how informed Jamie Raskin is. Quite the difference there. And it does make me sad thinking that someone like Lauren Boebert has the same power that someone like Jamie Raskin does. The difference in qualifications, but the exact same power, is really an unfortunate characteristic of the moment that we're currently in. And I will get to, after walking through the context, sort of talking about this broader demonization of now all immigrants. We've seen for a long time undocumented immigrants, and I've discussed that, of course, we want to enforce immigration law and we want people to come to the United States legally, but that doesn't justify the dehumanization, the vile fear-mongering that we hear from Republicans on that. But now they're expanding it to just all non-citizens, and that's what this legislation is a part of. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. I do want to note that blatantly, there's a little bit more nuance that we'll get to, but blatantly up front, Lauren Boebert's just lying in what she said and pretending like undocumented immigrants are getting representation in Congress or voting somehow. That's not true, and this is something that's been pushed aggressively now by Republicans in Congress. But the discussion is relating to the census. Every 10 years, a census is taken, as I'm sure you're aware, and all of the people living in the country are attempted to be accounted for, right? The census counts all the people that it can, so we get the correct understanding of who's living in the United States. Republicans want to exclude, as it pertains to the congressional apportionment process, non-citizens. And so going through this constitutionally, it's required that we count all residents. Article 1, Section 2, and the 14th Amendment specify that congressional seats are to be apportioned among the states based on their, quote, respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state. This language doesn't, as you notice, distinguish between citizens and non-citizens, legal residents or undocumented immigrants. And so they're saying even legal residents in the United States shouldn't be counted for in the congressional apportionment process. And historically, you have a long-standing precedent here. The earliest censuses in the United States, the practice has been to count all persons residing in the country, and this reflects the principle that representation in Congress should be based on the total population within each state, ensuring that everyone living in the state is represented. And this has been affirmed and reaffirmed in the judiciary time and time again. And one of the really important reasons for this is not because someone's going to get a vote in Congress if they're an undocumented immigrant or something, or even a non-citizen, a legal resident is not going to get a vote in Congress. They're not going to be able to vote in elections and choose who's in Congress. Instead, it's that the congressional apportionment process affects severely, significantly, the distribution of federal funds to states for a bunch of programs and services. And so if you're thinking about non-citizens, people living often legally in the United States in a particular city or town, you need Congress to be allocating funds properly to take care of all the residents in a particular place. Seems obvious. It's why we've been doing it for so long. It's not giving a vote to non-citizens. But that's the idea they've been pushing with this legislation and the let's make illegal non-citizens voting in elections when that's already illegal sort of thing. And that gets us to this broader demonization of all immigrants now. And the idea that America isn't made better, stronger, more innovative, etc., by the fact that we do have immigration to the United States. That's what created the America that we now know, but they want to shut the door behind them, very unfortunately. Here's more from this same debate on the House floor.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I want to make reference to a couple other documents before I discuss the bill. First of all, our Pledge of Allegiance, which we say every day, we pledge allegiance to the Republic for which we stand, right? The flag and the Republic for which we stand. When Benjamin Franklin, after our Constitution was ratified, he talked about giving us a republic if we can keep it. And I think people should analyze those two little quotes and wonder why there were references to republic in both of them. In any event, it kind of bugs me when people around here don't understand that. I think it's absolutely bizarre.
I'm inspired by the remarks of the gentleman from Wisconsin, especially about the word republic, which of course comes from res publica, the public thing. He happened upon a subject that's of a lot of interest to me because I wrote a paper about it when I was in 6th grade, the Pledge of Allegiance. It was written by a radical Baptist minister named Francis Bellamy. I'm not sure if the gentleman's aware of that, on the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the New World. And Reverend Bellamy, who was an abolitionist in Vermont, was concerned about the continuing salute of the Confederate battle flag in the southern states. And so he wanted to write a flag salute that would be unifying for the Union. And he wrote, "I pledge allegiance to my flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation with liberty and justice for all." And you notice what is not in there. He did not have under God. That was added in 1954 by Congress, several weeks after the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education. But in any event, I'm not quite sure what the relevance is of the gentleman's invocation of the Republic or of Ben Franklin and the famous vignette about him saying, if you can keep it. Ben Franklin was, of course, a big supporter of immigration to the country, although he did display an anti-German bias in some of his writings. But I'll tell you a little story about Ben Franklin that might be of relevance to what the gentleman's talking about. Apparently, because I just did a tour in Philadelphia with the Ben Franklin people up there, and we learned this wonderful story. He made a loan to a friend of his for $100, and then he recorded in his diary that this gentleman he made a loan to for $100, Josiah, was always disappearing behind a tree or a building whenever Ben came along. And he finally caught up with him and he said, "Josiah, you know, I loaned you $100, and I'm wondering, am I going to be able to get my principal back, or at least the interest?" And Josiah said, "Well, Ben, look, the $100 is well invested somewhere else, so you don't have to worry about that." And Franklin said, "Well, what about the interest?" He said, "Well, I forgot to tell you that it's against my religion to pay interest, so I can't pay you the interest." So Franklin said, "You mean to tell me it's against your principal to pay me the interest, and it's against your interest to pay me the principal?" And Josiah said, "Well, that's right." So Franklin said, "Well, I can see I'm not going to get either." Well, look, here our principles and our interests converge very much. The principles are set forth in the Constitution. which is we count everybody, and everybody is part of the census, and everybody is part of the reapportionment process. It's been like that since 1790. We don't need to start finger painting on the Constitution with this silly election year proposal. But it's also in our interests because, as my colleagues have said, this is a land that is built on immigration, except for the Native Americans who are already here and the people who were brought over as slaves. All of us are the descendants of immigrants to this country. Tom Paine said when he got to America in 1774, 2 years before the Revolution, he said, "This land, if it lives up to its principles, will become an asylum to humanity." Not an insane asylum, mind you. An asylum to humanity, a place of refuge for people seeking freedom from religious, political, and economic oppression. That's who we are. And every day I have in my office people from the hotel industry, people from the construction industry, people from the restaurant industry saying, we've got huge labor shortages. We need people in America. So I'm for a whole lot more lawful immigration to America, less unlawful immigration in America, like the deal that was worked out in the Senate that was rejected by the Republicans, and a lot less demagoguery about who we are as a country. Because the census and reapportionment provisions in the 14th Amendment tell it all. This is a country that's for everybody, seeking opportunity and hope, willing to follow the law and follow our Constitution. With that, I will yield to the gentlelady from New York.
Yeah, so again, Jamie Raskin just holding so much more knowledge in his head than any of the Republicans debating him. But the point that was being made by that Republican congressman drives me crazy because you'll see it a lot of times if I'm talking about the threat to democracy. If you scroll down the comments, you'll have to go far because nobody's liking these comments. But if you go very far down, you'll find some haters who will say something like, oh, you clearly don't understand what you're talking about. We're not a democracy. We're a republic. And people will get very proud of themselves. Did you know the United States is not a democracy? It's a republic. Mic drop. And of course, we're a democratic republic. Let's get down to the most basic form of this argument. Here's the definition, if you just Google it. A state in which supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives, and which has an elected or nominated president rather than a monarch. So yes, it's a form of representative democracy. A democratic republic is the process that we have, the constitutional process that we have. And so pretending like the points about wanting to uphold our democratic process are weakened by the fact that we have a particular type of that process being a republic just proves you're crazy and you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Let me know what you thought of all of that in the comments.